Any book?
Rav, I'm starting the recording.
You finished that?
Okay.
Okay. Gentlemen, you're being recorded all the way in Israel. You're getting recorded by Les.
Right.
I'm just alerting the fellows. Should I give you a place in there? If you give me that art scroll, I'll find a place there. Yep, there we go. Thanks.
Because the first of us won't know about any pages.
Lucy, you haven't tried jet sentence. I did. Friday last week before last.
You haven't tried monkey's radio.
Hello, man.
Would have whiskey.
30.
Fine.
I'm going to go from Itmanami 38B1.
What?
38B1 at the bottom. And we're going to go from there. Itmanami.
What?
Omar Rabba Bar Khan. Chief. At the bottom, 38B1. At the bottom there.
So that two, you1, yeah. Where?
You see on the left hand side, but I'm going to start where it says Itmar Nami, Omar Rabba Bar Khana. Can you see that?
Yeah.
A little bit past where it says Rab Nachman.
38B, where?
38B, if it's an art scroll, it's going to be on the left hand side at the bottom. Oh, in the classic text. Good question.
You know, 142.
It should be somewhere near the top. I'm not looking in a classic text, so I've got to see one to give you a page. Are you looking in the Gemora itself? It's about 6 lines from the top of the page. Itmar Nami Omar Rabba Bar Khana. We'll give a drop of context to you. There it is. You got it. It's about 6 lines. 38B. Lamed Ches Omar Bay is about 6 lines from the Is everybody okay, so L'chaim. For all those who
So I say we have the name of Lucy.
No, I got some else to see, but I don't know the name.
Name is
You
Chaya Miriam Bat Shana.
Chaim Miriam Bas Shaina.
It's Police Look.
Yeah.
It's Charlie. Remember Charlie? Louis what? Yeah, Louis what?
Jesus.
I don't know what happened to it. Maybe something wrong.
Shame. Just too much in this. Sorry, and Jonathan is Sholem Shana. Shame, you know, I met your son at Mill Park the one day.
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you? Yeah. You know, I was a little bit out of it because I was there for a very sad one that morning, a young person that, So when I was coming out over there, I wasn't. Sure. But anyways, please God, everybody should be well and gesund, happy stuff. Also, if anybody has any yortzeit, today, the 20th of Adar was the yortzeit of our grandmother, Bachana. It was 20 Adar was today. 20th of Adar. Daniela's grandmother. Sorry?
Grandmother tomorrow.
Really, your grandmother tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, no, don't offer your name.
So you can say English name. So good.
No.
Any name. We learn. Okay.
We're not having a man then.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do it for
Mina Bas Yoshua Zelig.
Mina Bas Yoshua Zelig. That's all.
Your time on the
29th of Adar. Okay. So have her in mind as well. And then just to give everybody a background, because there's some fundamental stuff over here, which is related to the laws of Bishul Akum, cooking by Gentile as we know it. And what we were talking about over there was that, well, first of all, just to, it's always good to give the context and a little bit of chazara, that our sages made this decree. They made a decree that we're not allowed to eat Bishul Akum, which basically means cooking, any form of cooking that was cooked by Gentiles. Pat Akum was bread baked by Gentiles. There were different reasons for the different things, but the general reason for the Bishul Akum and Pat Akum was a social one. They wanted to keep the communities, how would you call it, marrying into their own. They wanted to avoid intermarriage. And so it was, to some degree, it was a social rule, which is the reason why afterwards the Gemora explains that if a Jew participated in the cooking process, this is just a bit of a recap, we have already mentioned a lot of this, that if a Jew participated at all in the cooking process, then it's okay. In other words, if you have a non-Jewish cook, a non-Jewish person cooking for you, then you put on the stove, mix the food, salt it. The main one we use nowadays is turning on the stove, but it would be, and what the Gemara discusses over here, any form of participation in the cooking process. And the last thing the Gemara was discussing just before the piece that we're doing tonight was, does it make a difference whether, if you're saying that if it's some form of partnership, the non-Jew cooks and the Jew cooks, or the Jew participates and does something, does it matter whether we're talking about the beginning of the cooking process or the end of the cooking process? And you'll recall that the Gemara said it's a kol v'chomer. A kol v'chomer means that you can learn a stricter situation from a lighter one, or vice versa, a lighter one from a stricter one. What that means is, if the whole rule about Gentiles cooking and us not being able to partake is based on a social rule, then what would be the most part of, we're back in there. What is the most important part of the cooking process from a social perspective?
The eating.
Absolutely. And what in cooking, what's closest to eating?
Finishing.
The finishing, exactly. The last part. So if you're cooking, the completion of the cooking is going to be the most social. You know, even in restaurants, sometimes where they have a gimmick to bring out the food when it's not yet cooked. You know, those gimmicks when they arrive at the table with a frying pan and whatever. It's the last part that you're getting.
Rabbi, the text has gone. We're seeing you now.
You're seeing me and no text, okay?
But isn't the important thing that as long as the ingredients are kosher, what's the problem of having a person assisting who's not Jewish with the cooking of the food?
So assisting is not a problem. It's that what happened was that Chazal, our sages, made a decree that they cannot do the entirety of the cooking process.
Is that talking years ago or talking today?
It still applies today. We have to see what actually applies directly, because it's two things. It's the discussion in the Gemara, and then obviously one has to bear in mind, and we can confirm that, how the halacha is extracted out of the Gemara. Not everything that the Gemara says relates to what we do, because there might be opinions there that were not the concluded opinions. And we'll actually get examples of that. You'll see direct examples of that.
So I just want to say, since I'm a guest, I'm a Mechutin, are you saying the most important thing is that the conclusion is that the wife or the Jewish person should conclude in the food, but preparing it, a non-Jewish person can do it?
You know, if we're talking practically, look, there's the discussion of the Gemara, and there's the final way that we actually do it. And it's two different things. To talk about, so that to clarify what we do nowadays, in the majority of places, is we turn the stoves on. And according to most of the views, the mainstream views that most of us follow, the Sephardim are a little bit more stringent. We had Yossi's away actually at the moment, but we had him here the one evening to tell us that straight, the Sephardim, and we'll find out why, because if we get there, we can even talk about the difference between the Ramah, who's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and the Beis Yosef on that, which is why the Sephardim are different. But to summarize, if you put the stove on, then it doesn't matter if the Gentile does everything else. He can be the total chef. But if the Jew turns the switch, and that's what we do today. And then, in fact, my wife was driving out of, just to give an example, she was driving out of the Torah Academy where she teaches the last Friday, and a fellow was waiting by the guard hut because he was coming from the HOD across the road, and he said, please help me. I need a Jew to turn on the stove. I'm the cook and the preparer at the Sephardi shul. In the HOD, they have the Sephardi shul, and this fellow was waiting there because he knew at the school across, maybe on campus there, the Bethdians moved out. There's no more Gary Friedman there. He didn't have anyone to help him turn a stove on. So he crossed the road. I'm just giving you this is basically a practical example. This fellow crossed the road to the Torah Academy knowing he's going to find a Jew there, and he can ask the Jew to turn on. So turning on the stove is what we do. And if a Jew turns on the stove, then that is no longer considered bishul akum, the non-Jewish chef. And that was, we call it a ma'aser b'chol yom, which means a daily occurrence. I remember as a child, the maids from the people across the road, crossing the road to say they want to cook, and no one's home. Can we please cross the road and turn the stove on? But that's the rule that we follow. This is going back to where it all comes from. And where it comes from, sorry? Yeah. But there's different issues. There has to be a mashkiach, or what's considered, you can have what's called yotzei v'nichnas. It means there must be somebody coming in and out also. But that's for different reasons. There are different issues with regard to people cooking. One issue is, do they know what ingredients to put in the food? Is the food kosher? Where does it come from? We're not talking about that issue. We're talking about the fact that even if the food is 100% kosher, if it comes from a kosher establishment and all the ingredients are kosher, the rabbis made a decree, a gezeira, that if Gentiles cook, boom, it's not good. And that can only be avoided by a Jew participating in the cooking process. And the Gemora discusses different ways they can participate. But the main one we use is turning on the fire.
At that time, the Jew had to turn on the fire, another time a non-Jew.
So there's even a view that if you hand the fire to the non-Jew, so you get certain how would you call it, ovens that you light with. Like imagine in load shedding, now when people have to light a gas stove, so the electric thing doesn't light it. You need to take a clicker or whatever it is, and you need to it's a bit like a cigarette lighter and make a flame and light it. In fact, according to most views, even if you hand a non-Jew the flame and he uses the flame that you made to light it, that's also good enough. That's also good enough. So with an electric stove, it doesn't work that way. But when it's a fire, even giving the fire to the non-Jew, but Jew made the fire and gave it to the non-Jew, it's considered good enough. But in the Gemora we did last week, it wanted to know what happens if a Jew finished the cooking process. He explained that it doesn't matter which part of the process that the Jew does, any part of the process is considered to be a contribution to the cooking process. That's the discussion in the Gemora. Just to be short, we don't do that nowadays. We don't say you turn on the stove and I'll mix it and you do this. That Gemora is discussing the foundations. Today, the main thing we do is turn the stove on.
But if you do that,
it would be okay. And you know what? Let's say b'shat hatchak, but it also depends. It depends at what stage, by the way. If the food was completely cooked when you came in and mixed it, it doesn't help anymore. You've got to be part of the cooking process. As the Gemara will explain, you can divide most processes into a beginning, an end, and a middle. And if it's completely done before you arrive, if you mix a pot that already is ready to serve, it might be for garnishing or serving, but you're not doing anything. The Jew has to do something that affects the cooking process. So let's read it inside. Itmar Nami, we had also learned these 4 lines we actually did do last time. Where is this annotating thing? Yeah, here it is. Omar Rabba Bar Chana said, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Va'amrela Omar Rav Acha Bar Chana. Some people say it was Rav Acha Bar Chana, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Whether it was the non-Jew who put down the food on the fire, Yisrael, and the Jew turned the coals or made the fire work stronger. Yisrael, or the Jew put the food down, and the non-Jew turned it mutter. Either way, it's permissible. It's not prohibited. The isur, the prohibition of bishul akum, does not apply until the whole process happens by the non-Jew. In other words, if the Gentile does everything from start to finish, and the Jew makes no contribution to the cooking process whatsoever, not the fire, not the food, and when he arrives, it's time to eat, because everything's ready, then it's bishul akum. Then he's got a problem. But if he manages to make a contribution in the middle, at least as the Gemora says it, that is good enough.
Does this also apply to like small things, like when the boys making a scrambled egg?
They shouldn't make a scrambled egg in your house unless you turn the stove on. Yeah. Although you're asking a very good question. Yeah. This Gemora that we're about to learn now talks about eggs being different to other foods. But again, no rabbis are walking around today telling you that it doesn't apply to eggs. There's a whole discussion about eggs over here, that eggs are different to other food because they cook quicker and they cook in a shell. But the general way we do it today, to be safe, we consider all the foods to be the same. We don't, and if you remember the
skippers.
Sorry,
That's the same thing.
Yeah, you're making skippers.
Yeah. Well,
You have to switch on the stove.
you should switch on the stove no matter what she's making. Yeah. No matter what, we should always. They should know the best is to train.
It's only cooked stuff.
Actually, toaster wouldn't be a problem because you're putting ready cooked bread, in a toaster, and you're never cooking in a toaster unless it's one of those oven toasters, different kind of toaster. But a slot toaster, it's actually they can drop the toast in. But if it's those like American style toasters, and you're already going to make a little pizza and whatever inside there, then you got to start being careful because you never know, it can start getting complicated. Now. It's also important to know that, so we'll read a few lines inside, but I don't want to forget to mention it, that the Beit Yosef, who is the Shulchan Aruch itself, says that turning the fire is not enough, and that the Jew actually has to put the food onto the fire, which is the reason why Sephardim have this custom. The Sephardim actually maintain, as does the Beit Yosef, that a Jew must take the pot and put it on the fire, and the flame is not enough. The Ramah, who we follow, the Ashkenazi world, the Ramah says that turning on the fire is enough. And that's basically the prevailing, that's what you're going to see in most of the world today, turning on of the fire. But let's read it inside.
It's minimum.
No, you're allowed to do that. It's not
Okay.
Not a problem at all. You're working in your study. The lady comes to the study and says, "Can you come and turn on the stove? I want to make supper." No problem. You turn on the stove. She makes supper. No problem. And yes, if she wants to make something for herself, she should also ask a Jew in the household to turn on the stove. That's Amar Ravina. So Ravina said, Hilchasa, the halacha is like this: Harifta, this bread, the shagar ovid kechavim, that a non-Jew threw, so to speak, onto the fire. Or let's say he lit the fire, va'afar Yisrael, and a Jew actually baked it. In other words, he's giving different variations over here. The non-Jew lit the flame, but the Jew actually baked it. Inami, or let's go the other way around. Shagar Yisrael va'afar ovid kechavim. The Jew lit the fire, turned on the oven. Va'afar ovid, in those days, turning on the oven meant, lighting the coals, but it would be the same thing. Va'afar ovid kechavim, and the non-Jew baked. In these cases, it works because as long as the Jew has a part in the process. Inami, or even Shagar Ovid Kechavim, the non-Jew lit the fire, Va'afa Ovid Kechavim, and the non-Jew baked, Va'asa Yisrael, and the Jew came in the middle, V'chita b'chatuya, and he stoked the coals. Shaper Domi, that also works. Because even if the Jew speeds up the cooking process, as long as it's in the middle of the cooking process, it's good enough. He makes a significant contribution to the cooking process. So here you would see that even if the Jew hadn't gotten involved, it still would have cooked, because a non-Jew turned on the oven, a non-Jew put the food in the oven, and all the Jew did, it was an oven with coals. He came along and he moved the coals around.
But
He
in
set it up.
today's time, and
Sorry?
by just virtue turning up the heat from the knob, is that also participating?
If you catch it in the middle when it's not yet cooked, the time we do it is at the beginning nowadays, because the risk of doing it later on in the cooking process is once it's cooked, you can't cook it again. So it's too late.
Well, but it's
Yeah.
hard also, but some people like it and some people like it well done.
So if
So
you
it's in
remember,
the rare
yeah.
state and you carry on.
So at the first stage, I think we called it a third cooked. Remember, we spoke about that bandit, bendroisai, when it hits the first level that most people, or maybe even if it's not most, the first level that people would call edible, like if you go to the restaurant, go to the left of their options. What's it called? Rare, super rare. The first level at which the chef will say that's cooked, which is probably, that's even probably more cooked than bendroisai. Bendroisai was considered to be a little bit raw. The problem is that once it hits that level, it's already considered cooked. And if a non-Jew cooked it, you can't save it anymore. That's the problem.
But the majority of people wouldn't be able to eat it.
Doesn't matter. For this, it doesn't matter. It matters that it's already, I think that goes by a third cooked.
But-
Bendroisai, I think, was a third cooked. That's how he cooked his meat. He liked it 1/3.
But if
Whatever you call a third. I don't know if it's the temperature or the redness or the shit. But you have to be careful, because if it's already cooked, it's already cooked.
But if you take vegetables that your housekeeper prepares it, puts it on the oven, prepares it, and the wife comes and just makes sure that it's cooked properly, even though that the wife hasn't put on the.
She should put on the stove right at the beginning.
Sorry.
Nowadays, what we try to do is put on the stove.
Turn the oven on and that's it.
Yeah, we turn
That's
that.
easier.
Yeah, that's the easiest.
And the zinger where I go to shul,
Yeah.
the guy comes out every morning.
Yeah,
He says, please, will you
come-
light the candle? Because he lights
that's
he lights the gas, yeah.
So basically, he takes a candle from you and goes to.
I light it and then he.
Exactly, we were just saying. In other words, that's the, and that is the Ashkenazim. That's the Ramah. The Sephardim wouldn't be happy with that, but that is the general prevailing way it's done in the world. That the caterers also do that. I've seen it functions. Yeah, I've seen it as functions as well. The Gemora then says, Dag Maliach. The Gemora discusses salted fish that has been salted, and we can discuss what it means. You know, sometimes instead of cooking, we pickle. So Dag Maliach, it's almost like pickled fish in a brine.
Yes.
Sorry,
Makia fish. Makias, how do you call it?
is it called makias?
A fish salted.
Oh.
In Hebrew, the dag malua.
Oh, machas, like machas herring, like M-A-T-J, machas herring. Dag Maliach, Chizkiah Sharav Rabbi Yochanan Osar. The Gemara says that sage called Chizkiah said that it doesn't matter if a non-Jew salted the fish, and Rabbi Yochanan prohibited it. Now, what's at the corner of this, the cornerstone of this argument is that there's an argument over what we're talking about over here. Either we're talking about, is the salting process considered bishul cooking for this purpose? When our sages said that Gentiles cannot cook food for us, and that's bishul akum, did they mean, now we're getting technical, specifically using heat? A method of cooking where you use heat, fire, electricity. Or is the pickling process when you pickle something in brine, like when you salt fish, because you are rendering it edible. You're taking a fish that was raw, that nobody would eat it in that format. Yeah, but smoking is already is with heat. We're talking here where there's no heat, like you pickle it in a brine. When you put it in a brine. Now, if you put fish in a brine, you salt fish. They used to do that apparently. And the fish changed, its status changed from raw or non-edible to edible as a result of salt or a pickling brine. And by the way, there are many cases in halacha where the halacha says that 24 hours of pickling is comparable to cooking. Kovosh kemavushal dama in the laws of Bacher B'chalav, in the laws of meat and milk and that mixes.
24 hours.
Exactly. it would be 24 hours. Here we're not necessarily talking 24 hours. I'm just using that as an example. But in those halachas, it says that that's considered cooking. Now we want to know when the sages made the decree of Bishul Akum, that Gentiles can't cook food for Jews, did they mean only with heat, or did they mean even food that is salted until it's edible? Now, it would seem the first way of understanding, Biltong is like that, exactly. It would seem over here that the understanding is that Chizkiah says it's okay. In other words, Chizkiah's opinion is that the decree of Bishul Akum applies to heating food, to cooking it by way of heat. If you get the food edible in a different way, like by salting it, then that's not Bishul Akum. That's not the rule, doesn't apply to that kind of scenario. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's the same thing. If the non-Jew gets that food from non-edible to edible, boom, it's not good. Then there are others, just to show you how technical Gemora can get. Some of the commentaries say that that's not the argument. In other words, there's no decree on salting. Salting's got nothing to do with Bishul Akum, according to everybody. The difference is as follows, according to other commentaries. It shows you how. That what the Gemora was actually talking about is that if you take a large fish, as he called it, that's not edible, its flesh is raw, not edible, but nobody's going to eat it in it that way, and you salt it in order to make it edible, the salting process gets it a certain degree edible, where some people will start to eat it because it's been in brine. Maybe not everybody's flavor of the month, but some people will start eating it. Now, your next question comes along, most people are still going to cook it. They're going to buy it from the wholesaler, how would you call it, cured or in brine, and they're going to then cook it. Most are going to cook it. But some people will consider that already edible. Now the question is, if a non-Jew goes and cooks it, is that considered Bishul Akum because it already was an edible thing? Or do we say it's not considered Bishul Akum because of the fact that it was already cooked? So do you see the difference in how this argument's interpreted? Some are saying that the argument is over the essential act of salting. Is salting a cooking process or is it not? And that's their argument. And others are saying everybody agrees that salting is not cooking. It's a different thing. The question is, if the food is rendered edible, can it still be cooked after that and be Bishul Akum? Maybe a person can say, can't be Bishul Akum because he cooked something that was already cooked. But either way, yeah.
You take par-cooked chicken.
Yeah. Par-cooked is cooked. There's no question about it. Par-cooked is halachically cooked. Par-cooked is most probably
par-cooked meat or chicken.
Ben Droisai would eat it. That bandit.
At home to finish it off. That is not a problem. She can light the fire.
You won't do it. That's not what we would do lechatchila. But if there was a mishap, like the maid forgot to ask someone to turn it on, you probably would be off the hook. If you went to the rabbi and you said, we had a problem, the maid forgot to ask someone to turn the stove on. But the good news is the food was par-cooked. I'm going to guess that you would be okay. You can't do that lechatchila. But had you done that? Yeah, because the food that she cooked was already cooked. But anyway, let's read this inside. Dag Maliach, so the salted fish, Chizkiah Sharab, Rabbi Yochanan Asar. Chizkiah says it's okay, Rabbi Yochanan prohibited it. Beitz Sluya, roasted egg. They used to put eggs with the shell over the fire. Bar Kapora Shara, a sage called Bar Kapora said that the cooking of eggs is different to other food, and there's no issue of Bishul Akum when you cook an egg on a fire. It's fine. Even if it was a non-Jew who cooked an egg on a fire, it's fine. Where Rabbi Yochanan also, Rabbi Yochanan argued and said prohibited. It's not allowed. If we talk for a moment, what would the difference be between eggs and other foods? And the difference between eggs and other foods were discussed a few different things. The one is that some people believe that egg is already edible raw. You know, people put them in eggnog. There's certain foods in the world where raw egg is utilized. So there's some people that do, and certain cultures, they do spice eggs. They put in, I don't know, whatever spices, and they eat it. So one view is that maybe because egg can be eaten raw, it's considered different to other foods. Then there's another view that because eggs are cooked in the shell, if you put the egg in the shell on the fire, it's a different cooking process because you're cooking something that's completely covered. You're not, the meat or whatever is not exposed to the flame or the heat. Then another view came along and said that the issue is that eggs cook very quickly compared to other foods like meat and fish. An egg cooks very, very quick. You crack it, you put it in the pan, or even if it's in the shell, if the heat is high, 2 minutes later, it's soft-boiled, another minute and it's hard-boiled. But so basically, the commentaries on the Gemora discussed that there were various reasons to think that eggs is different to other foods.
Another problem.
But that's not what we're talking about here. That's a whole different story. We're talking about bishul akum. If cooking eggs that don't have blood, that are 100%, if a non-Jew cooks them, is it a problem? You know, it's very targeted and focused in Gemora. We're talking about the issue of bishul akum, and it would seem from this Gemora that there are opinions that it doesn't apply to eggs. Again, you don't see people in practice doing that today. You don't see people saying it's not a problem for non-Jews to cook eggs. It's only a problem for them to cook meat. We put the eggs in the same basket, if we could use the pun, with everything else. We put all the eggs in the basket with everything else. In one basket, Bacher, Rabbi Yochanan, and Aser. Then the Gemara says, Ki Aser Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi, the sage Rav Dimi, came from Eretz Yisrael, Omar, he said, Echad dag maliach ve'echad beitzat sloya, both the salted fish and the roasted eggs. Chizkiah bar kapara sharu. There was a debate between Chizkiah and bar kapara, but Rabbi Yochanan also and Rabbi Yochanan prohibited. If you notice, what he's doing is changing the format of the argument. According to one opinion, and these things are very important, you'll see why. Everything in Gemara was remembered by rote. And people reported a debate or an argument. And sometimes somebody would say, no, you didn't get it right. It's not exactly what he said. It's not exactly who he was arguing with. Every technicality. So do you see what happened over here is the Gemara reported what seemed to be two separate arguments. An argument between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan over roasted eggs. And an argument between Bar Kapara and Rabbi Yochanan over... Other way around, sorry. An argument between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan over salty fish, and an argument between Bar Kapara and Rabbi Yochanan over roasted eggs as two separate things. Rav Dimi said, no. It was one argument. Both those food types were in the same arguments. Two sages versus the third. In other words, it was a 2 against. What's the difference? Is that now you've got a 2 against 1. It wasn't Rabbi Yochanan against Chizkiah in one story, and Rabbi Yochanan versus Bar Kapara in another. He says it was all there together. One idea that there was a discussion over fish that was salted in brine, not properly cooked, not cooked with heat, eggs that are different to other foods, and in that story, both Chizkiah and Bar Kapara said those are okay. They don't fall in the category of bishul akum. Eggs are different, salted fish is different, and Rabbi Yochanan argued and said, no, just as prohibited as anything else. What do you have now? 2 against 1. That's what's relevant about it. So the Gemara says, Rab Chia Parva, the Gemara reports this anecdotally, that Rav Chia from a place called Parva.
Rav Chia Parva.
Yeah. Rav Chia Parva. Rav Chia of a place called Parva, Iklala by Reish Galusa, came to the home of the Reish Galusa, was the leader in exile, the exilarch. Amrulay, so the attendants of the Reish Galusa, who was like the leader in Galus or whatever, asked a question, what do? We're cooking over here. We have a shaila. It would seem that the Gentile chefs have been cooking eggs. Amrulay, Beitzet Sloya Mai. They said to him, what's the story with eggs roasted by Goyim? Is it a problem? Or is it not a problem? In other words, are they part of the decree of bishul akum or not? So he said, Amalahu, he said, he reported the argument we just had, Chizkiah bar kapara shara. The sages Chizkiah bar kapara said it's okay, roasted eggs, cooked by non-Jews, but Rabbi Yochanan asar, and Rabbi Yochanan prohibited. V'ain dvarav shel echad, it's maths. V'ain dvarav shel echad b'mkoim shnayim. The opinion of one doesn't stand up to the opinion of 2. In other words, you've got 2 sages versus 1. Boom. Amalahu Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid responded to that. Don't listen to him. Got a little bit hectic. Don't listen to that. Hacha Amar Abaya. This is what Abaya said. My Rebbe Abaya said differently. Hilchasa Kavasa de Rabbi Yochanan. The law is according to Rabbi Yochanan, not according to Chizkiah and Bar Kapara. So the Gemora says that, I mean, these are anecdotes, so one shouldn't take it. It seems they were cross with him for saying that. So at Ashkiuhu Nagoita the Chala, they gave him vinegar to drink. They spiked his drink with vinegar, V'nach nafshe, and he died. A lot of these stories, anecdotes in the Gemara are not necessarily, doesn't mean that they actually killed him, but it could be a little bit like when your mother once said to you, I'm going to kill you if you do that, you know. But basically, they were very angry with Rav Zvid for opposing.
Because you're a good guy.
The fact is, he don't.
Yeah.
Every day.
They gave him a cup of spiced vinegar to drink and he died. Yeah, that's where we'll stop reading inside. If anybody wants to discuss anything outside.
Suffered the Reish Lakish.
Rav Zvid?
Who died?
No. You're thinking of the Purim story, Rav Zaira.
No, I think Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish.
Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, yeah, there's a similar story with them. But I think.
So who died?
The Yochanan.
Rabbi Yochanan died, so therefore.
No, this is not. No, Rabbi Yochanan didn't die over here. Rabbi Zvid. Yeah, Rabbi Zvid. Yeah.
No, Rabbi Yochanan died. Because the son of Rabbi Yochanan was pissed off with Reish Lakish because he was his uncle. He died because he wanted Reish Lakish to Bacher become Rabbi Yochanan's sister. And then they had a child, and the child in our Gemora Shiur,
I don't think so.
the son is actually argue with Reish Lakish about something halachically. And he was very.
It's not the same story.
But it's a different story.
Because Rabbi Yochanan died. Thank you. Something to do with Reish Lakish.
Yeah, I think we're just coming from Purim, that there was a Purim soda where it said that things got too exciting. And who was it? I think it was Rabba. It says that Rabba shechted Rav Zaira at a Purim soda. But then he made a miracle and he revived him. And the next year he invited him to his Purim party and he didn't want to come. He said, why are you not coming? He said, because of what happened last year. So he said, but I resurrected you, I revived you last year. He says, I don't have to believe in miracles. I don't want to rely on miracles. Just because last year we managed to reverse it doesn't mean we'll manage to reverse it this year. Yeah.